On this week's show, the NCAA hands down penalties for infractions involving the Georgia Southern football team. We discuss that and much more as we welcome you inside the Eagles' Nest. And welcome inside the Eagles' Nest. I'm your host, Josh Aubrey, being joined by Mike Anthony, sports editor and Georgia Southern beat writer for the Statesboro Herald. And Mike, right in the middle of the summer, we're thinking, oh yeah, everything's going smooth. We just got to get August here. Football season will start, of course. Can't be that easy, can it?
Never.
We get maybe not a bombshell, but a pretty important story that comes out on Thursday that the NCAA released their findings on a recent investigation involving Georgia Southern football, and I guess the penalties are not as severe as they could be. A lot of people were around and remember the 1995-96 grade tampering scandal that happened with head basketball coach Frank Kearns, which ended up with him being fired, being on not only probation, but being limited severely scholarship-wise. I guess this way you're only so far, it looks like $50,000, 2 scholarships. On paper, when you look at how many scholarships Georgia Southern has, maybe more of a slap on the wrist, but your thoughts, first of all, on what's happened and kind of bring people up to speed on what's going on with Georgia Southern.
Well, as far as punishments go, you're right, it could have been a lot worse, especially when you deal with academics, which is what this centers around. 2 separate incidents dating back to 2013. Apparently a former Georgia Southern football player received a flash drive, had some work on it from a class that he was taking, previous work that is. He ended up using some of that. The professor finds out, they ask him about it. It seems as though someone in the athletic department, compliance department, had supplied him with that, so wrongdoing on both parts there. There's one of your counts, and then the next season, that would have been 2014, another member of the Student Athlete Services, the team that'll help the team with tutoring, getting them some help with homework, a little bit too much help given. It turns out that one of those Student Athlete Services members filed a couple of extra credit reports for 2 different football players. So 3 players in question total, 2 former employees of Georgia Southern total. As far as we know, both employees no longer with Georgia Southern. At least 2, according to the NCAA report, a little bit vague, but at least 2 of those players in question no longer on the team, having graduated or been dismissed. So a lot of smoke and mirrors, but what's clear are a few of the punishments that the NCAA has handed down already.
All right, well, let's go with the first one. 2013, that was under then head coach Jeff Monken. A player had played in at least 1 game, I guess, before all this happened, then was dismissed and never played in any others. So it shouldn't affect, for instance, the Florida game. There was no Southern Conference Championship that Georgia Southern was involved with, kind of a tough season. But the Florida win, I guess, is one that a lot of people would not like to see go off the books. It doesn't look as though that's going to happen because the player only played in 1 game.
And it comes down to semantics. I mean, there are plenty of official games that never officially happened that all of us remember. Everyone knows the Fab Five. If you look in the record books, if you look up in the rafters at Michigan, those banners aren't there. So even if it is deemed that Georgia Southern had an ineligible player that takes away the Florida win, that takes away the Sun Belt Championship, I think that one's kind of more dealt as a blow to the fans. They're the ones that are going to have to hear about it from rivals. They're the ones that are going to have to see a banner taken down. But really, that's more of a punitive damage done to the university. It's the things like athletic scholarships, recruiting time, recruiting visits. Those sort of penalties are kind of aimed at the football program for those 2 separate incidents.
Okay, the second incident involving the 2 players, it seems as though one of the players either didn't participate or wasn't around, and it also seems like the other player did. Now the big question would be, it seems as though the timeline that this happened in December, that it wouldn't affect the 2014 season necessarily, but it might affect this past season.
Right. Again, it gets into reading the tea leaves that the NCAA puts out there. A lot of information as to what exactly occurred, maybe not so specific as to when exactly it occurred. It said that this former employee was able to acquire the login, the passwords for submitting work for these two players, unbeknownst to them, but illegal nonetheless. It disqualifies them from competition even though they didn't know. She did it in an attempt to keep them eligible. The NCAA's official report says that happened in December of 2014, which would be after the Eagles' final game. If you recall, November of 2014 was the Eagles' final game. No bowl that year because they were transitioning up into FBS, their final game, November 29th. What it doesn't say is that it could have gone on in 2015. It says that one of those two players affected did play in games while they were ineligible. That doesn't necessarily mean that it happened in the fall of 2014 when the infraction took place.
So if we're looking at 2015, then the big loss or possibility of having it taken away would be the first ever bowl victory for Georgia Southern. If indeed the player played in that, then maybe they take that away. It doesn't look as though the Sun Belt Championship from the year before would be affected, but we don't know. As you mentioned off camera, we can get into this. Sometimes instead of suspending the player, is the school rolling the dice thinking, okay, now he's eligible, now we'll be okay. I believe, you can look back to maybe Cam Newton at Auburn at the time or some other more recent ones, and it's a roll of the dice. It looks as though the Eagles may have rolled the dice this past season with that player. We just don't know to what extent, because right now the frustration from us and from a lot of fans is, who are they?
Right.
And what is going to happen next? As you mentioned, it doesn't take away the excitement of the games and things like that, but I still think it's kind of harsh. They come back and they take away, well, I wouldn't say harsh, it would be detrimental, it would be frustrating if they were to come back and take away the GoDaddy Bowl trophy, the Sun Belt trophy, and you can't write that down on your wall anymore.
Right, and kind of difficult. You're going to have to take all those pictures off the wall. You don't want to go around touting titles that, even if everybody remembers it, you didn't technically win. But for Georgia Southern, the main thing right now is to clean house and take care of business. Probation, a 2-year probation period, that's one of the stipulations of these infractions, one of the penalties. And if the NCAA's meant anything with their discipline in previous years, it's that if you continue to do wrong, they're going to come back at you harder and harder and harder, especially with maybe a school like Georgia Southern that doesn't quite have the clout, the lawyers, the money. You see some of these schools riled up in scandals that never seem to turn into punishments, or at least not severe ones. I wouldn't think that Georgia Southern could step that heavily through a minefield.
Well, Mike, one of the frustrating things from a journalistic standpoint in all this is not being able to have somebody step out in front of a camera and say, here's what's going on, which causes us to speculate as we have. One thing that we did find out back in May, and I think we both were wondering when we heard this NCAA thing was coming out on Thursday, we both went, does this have to do with the Title IX investigation? We haven't brought this up on our shows yet. It hasn't been in the paper yet, but both of us spoke with Athletics Director Tom Kleinlein as to some rumors that were going on, that Title IX investigations were going on at Georgia Southern, and he talked to both of us on the record and said, yes, that is going on, but that was about all he could say at the time.
And that was a completely unrelated incident. Actually, that's outside the purview of NCAA. Once a complaint's made, it's not made with the NCAA, actually made with the Department of Education, Title IX of federal funding issues. So that was a complaint that was made. Again, much like the recent NCAA complaints and sanctions, not a lot of names, not a lot of details get discussed. In fact, Kleinlein was specific about the fact that even they don't know who made the complaint, what it was about. All they know is that a complaint was lodged. Some investigators showed up. They were asked to provide kind of a layout, a PowerPoint presentation, if you will, of exactly how they run their ship over at the athletics department, how they use their funds, how, I guess, breaking it down into what the men's teams, what the women's teams are provided with, what their daily life's like. And overall, Kleinlein seemed like Georgia Southern doing a pretty good job, actually kind of touted as an ability to kind of emphasize the strides that have been made over the last couple of years.
So I guess that's still out there, and if we hear any more on that or anything comes out of that, it'll be in the paper. We'll have it on the Eagles Nest as well. Well, for now, that'll wrap things up. For Mike Anthony, I'm Josh Aubrey. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again soon.